Hey everybody, I'm here again with Frindle. We're looking at chapter 12, only 4 chapters here to go. This chapter is called Airwaves, and I'm wondering if you thought about, after I read chapter 11, I asked you to think about what do you think this chapter was going to be about. So I'd be really curious to hear if your predictions were correct. Here we go. This is a little bit longer of a chapter too, so stick with me, all right? Within a week after the article was published in the Westfield Gazette, the kids at the junior high and the kids at the high school had stopped using the word pen and had started using the word frindle. They loved it. Nick became sort of a hero for kids all over town, and he quickly learned that being a hero, even if you're only a local hero, isn't a free ride. It has a price. People noticed Nick when he walked into his dad's hardware store and when he stood at the line at the penny pantry to buy a candy bar. He could feel it when someone recognized him, and it made him shy and awkward. Kids at school started expecting him to be clever and funny all the time, and even for a kid as smart as Nick, it was asking a lot. Every teacher, the office secretary, the principal, even the school nurse and the custodian all seemed to be watching. Always watching. His parents were great about everything. True, his mom had been upset when the article first came out, and so had his dad. Nick had said, "But I didn't do anything wrong, Mom, and neither did that lady from the newspaper." And his parents could see that he was right. The things in the article were true, and the truth is the truth, and nothing could be done about it now. Even though it made them uncomfortable to have their boy talked about all over town, secretly, Nick's mom and dad were pleased. After all, the brand new word is a pretty amazing thing. Their Nicholas was quite a fellow, no getting around it. Someone else in town thought this brand new word was pretty amazing too. Bud Lawrence had lived all his life in Westfield, and when he was only 19 years old, he had saved enough money to make an investment. He looked around for a good idea and then bought the first Dairy Queen in the state. After a few years, he bought a McDonald's restaurant that was almost 30 years ago, and these 2 restaurants had made him rich, one of Westfield's leading citizens. When Bud Lawrence saw the article about the new word, he had his lawyer file a preliminary trademark claim on the word frindle. Within 4 days, he had set up a small company that was selling cheap plastic ballpoint pens specifically imprinted with the word frindle. He sold 3,000 frindles the first week, and they sold so fast that stores all over Westfield couldn't keep them in stock. Then, just as quickly, kids stopped asking for frindles. The sales slowed down, and Bud Lawrence started thinking about other projects. A week later, it was Halloween, the leaves started falling, and it seemed like the town was going to quiet down. And it would have, if it hadn't been for Alice Lutterson. Alice lived in Betherly, a town 7 miles from Westfield, and she worked part-time for a local CBS television station in Carrington, a town of about 75,000 people. When there was important area news, disasters like floods or tornadoes, or sometimes if she came across little stories that seemed cute or original, Alice would station news manager in Carrington. If it was a good story, or if it was a day when not much else was happening in the world, when the TV station would send out a van with a camera crew to shoot some videotape. Alice subscribed to all small-town newspapers in the area to keep up with local events. Most of them were published on Thursday, and then they arrived at her house by Monday or Tuesday. Then it took her a day or so to look through them all. On Wednesday morning, she finally saw the article in the Westfield Gazette about the word war. When she read it through twice, she carefully looked at the class photograph. She was sure that this story was a winner. The TV station manager in Carrington agreed with her. He called the CBS station in Boston because sometimes Boston picked up stories from the Carrington newsroom. The woman in Boston thought the story had some real zip to it, so she called the network news editor in New York. When the facts of the Westfield Gazette article got to New York, the staff there loved it. They looked over the schedule sheet for the week and decided it would be a perfect closing story for the CBS Evening News for the next day, Thursday. Orders flew back through the telephone links from New York to Boston to Carrington to Betherly. By Wednesday at noon, Alice had a go order to take the story all the way. It was her first piece to get onto the national news, and 20 million viewers would see it. Alice Lunderson and her camera crew stood on Mrs. Granger's front porch Wednesday after school. Mrs. Granger was not impressed at all by the lights and the microphones. She looked right into the camera and said, "I have always said that the dictionary is the finest tool ever made for educating young minds, and I still say that. Children need to understand that there are rules about words and language, and that those rules have a history that makes sense. And to pretend that a perfectly good English word can be replaced by a silly made-up word just for fun of it, well, it's not something I was ready to stand by and watch without a fight." "And have you lost that fight, Mrs. Granger?" asked the reporter. Mrs. Granger's eyes turned up to nearly full power as she looked into the camera, and with a pale smile, she said, "It's not over yet." When Alice and the crew showed up at Nick's house, the Allen family was ready for them. Mom and Dad sat on the couch with Nick between them. Nick squinted into the lights. His mom had worked out with Nick what he could say and what he could not say. "You remember, young man," she told him as she combed his hair, "these reporters are just looking for a quick story that'll make some excitement. But you have to stay here and live in this town, so mind your P's and Q's." As they sat there on the couch, Mrs. Allen had her foot on top of Nick's under the coffee table, and if she pushed down, it meant that the reporter had just asked a question that she was going to answer for him. Mrs. Allen did not trust reporters. "So tell me, Nick, why did you make up the new word frindle?" asked Alice Lunderson. Nick gulped and said, "Well, my teacher, Mrs. Granger, said that all words in the dictionary were made up by people and that they mean what they mean because we say they do. So I thought it would be fun to just make up a new word and see if that was true." "And were you surprised when Mrs. Granger got mad about that?" asked Alice with a smile. There was a push on Nick's foot, and his mother said, "We never felt that Mrs. Granger got angry. When everyone started using the word frindle, it just got to be a disruption. That's all. She's really a fine teacher." "Yeah," said Nick. "I mean, I learned a lot about words, and without her, I wouldn't have." "So what's next for you in the new word?" Alice was wrapping it up. She could see that Nick and his parents were not going to be pushed into saying anything controversial, so she just kept it light and happy. "Well," said Nick, "the funny thing is, even though I invented it, it's not my word anymore. Frindle belongs to everyone now, and I guess everyone will figure out what happens together." Alice also had a short chat with a worried-looking Mrs. Chatham and a smiling Bud Lawrence, maker of the official frindle. Then she shot her opening bit and her closing bit, and the camera crew drove back to Carrington to edit all the pieces and put them together into a 2-minute news story. That next night, when all the serious news about wars and oil prices and world food supplies had been talked about on the CBS Evening News, the anchorman looked into the camera and smiled. He said, "It's believed by many that the word quiz was made up in 1791 by a Dublin theater major named Daly. He had bet someone that he could invent a brand new word in the English language, and he chalked it up the letters quiz onto every wall in the building around town. The next morning, there it was. And within a week, all over Ireland were wondering what it could mean. A new word had been created. Quiz is the only word in English that was invented by one person for no particular reason. That is until now. Now there's a new word, frindle. And here is Alice Lunderson in Westfield, New Hampshire with the story. Alice came on the screen with a short introduction. Then right there on TV, Mrs. Granger, Nick, Bud Lawrence, and Nick's mom were talking to 20 million people about frindles. One of those 20 million people was a producer for the late night show with David Letterman. And another one of those 20 million people was a staff writer for People magazine. And another one was a writer for 321 Contact magazine for kids. Dozens of other writers and producers and marketing people saw that news story, and all of them smelled a great story. During the next 3 weeks, every man, woman, and child in America heard about this new funny word and that kids were using instead of the word pen. And kids in Ohio and Iowa and New York and Texas and California all started using it too. Bud Lawrence was suddenly flooded with orders for anything with the word frindle on it, and he quickly got interested again. But there were complications. Bud's lawyer said, "You see that stack of orders there? Trouble. That's what that is. We got a trademark filed, but it's only the application. The whole country knows that that little kid made up the word, and unless you make a deal with his dad, you're going to end up with nothing, maybe even a big fat lawsuit. That kid owns the word. When Mr. Allen came home at lunchtime, his wife told him that he had a call from Bud Lawrence. It's something about the new word. This was not good news to Tom Allen. He was sick and tired of all the fuss, and being away from the hardware store so much while all this nonsense was happening had put him weeks behind on the paperwork. He'd be lucky now to get his Christmas order in time. Even though he didn't really want anything to do with it, Bud was an old friend, so on the way back to the store, Nick's dad went to Bud Lawrence's office. "Tom, good to see you," said Bud. He stood up and walked around his desk to shake hands. "Have a seat." Tom sat down uneasy, and Bud pulled another chair over. Ever see Westfield so stirred up about something in your life? You and Ginny must be pretty proud.